Today I'll be cooking a working-class Victorian picnic inspired by the writings of Susanna Moodie. The first recipe that I'll be preparing is a raspberry pie. This recipe takes the longest to cook, which is why I'm starting it first. The first thing I'm doing is mixing cold butter and flour to form the pie dough. I'm splitting the dough in half so I can roll out one for the bottom and one for the top. It's a tricky dough to work with because it can break apart very easily, but the result tastes like a shortbread cookie. You should have a well-floured surface and rolling pin when rolling out the dough. Be careful when putting the dough in the pie pan. Like mine, it could fall apart. Raspberries would have been foraged or grown in a kitchen garden and were very accessible. I added half a cup of sugar and topped it off with the lid of the pie. I used a small cookie cutter to cut a vent to allow steam to escape. I'll be cooking this pie in a bake kettle, otherwise known as a Dutch oven. First, I lay coals on the brick area of the hearth and rest the cast iron bake kettle on top. Opening the lid, it's easy for me to place the pie onto the trivet at the bottom. While it's all fun and games now, it's important to be careful when taking the pie out to avoid getting burned. Then, I'll add hot coals on the top and let it bake. The next recipe that I'm preparing is soda bread. It only has 4 ingredients and is very easy to prepare because you don't have to let it rise like other bread recipes. I included this recipe as bread would have been served with almost every meal. This bread, commonly known today as Irish soda bread, has an Irish connection, and I wanted to pay homage to the many Irish domestic workers that were living and working in Upper Canada during this time period. It's likely they could have prepared a meal similar to this one for their employers' picnics or work bees. It's important to cut across into the top of the bread. Legend says that this is to allow the fairies to escape and prevent causing mischief, but from a scientific point of view, it's to make sure that there is enough space for the bread to expand as it rises. I'm using the top of the larger bake kettle to heat the bottom of the smaller one. Then I'll place the bread inside and cover it with the lid. Adding coals on top, I'll cook it just like the pie. Having heat coming from the top and bottom, make sure that the hot air can circulate inside the bake kettle to evenly heat the food inside. Stacking 2 bake kettles, in my opinion, is very high-tech. The main part of the meal will consist of chicken. Roasted meats were the preferred method of preparing meat in Upper Canada. We know this from various archaeological findings of faunal remains. I'm seasoning the chicken with a bit of salt and pepper. The device I'm using is called a reflector oven, and it is used to make roasts. The chicken is rotated manually on the spit. To secure the chicken, it is first trussed and then a spit is placed through it. For added support, we add pins. The spit has small holes, so you have to line up the pin through the chicken and the holes to make sure it's stable. I tested out the spinning action to make sure it won't fall apart as I'm cooking, and it looks pretty good. It's important to have a strong or quick fire for this, as the heat and light will reflect on the back of the oven, making sure to cook the chicken completely. Next, I'm working on a wild rice pudding. Wild rice is a traditional food staple for many Indigenous peoples in what is now called Ontario. The Anishinaabe word for wild rice is manoman. This recipe is from the Female Emigrant's Guide and is one clear example of how Indigenous foodways were adapted by settlers. I've already cleaned and parboiled the rice, so the next step is to boil it for half an hour in milk. It's important to give it a stir once in a while to prevent the milk from burning. Once the rice has cooled slightly, I poured it into another bowl to add seasoning. This consists of butter, cinnamon, and nutmeg. Finally, I added 2 eggs to keep the pudding stuck together during the next step. Grab a tea towel or dedicated pudding cloth and spoon out the mixture into the middle. This is a traditional way of making puddings boiled in water. You wrap the pudding in cloth, tie it tight with some twine, and then make sure to submerge the entire cloth in water so that it doesn't burn. I boiled this pudding for about half an hour. Next, I'll make some roast potatoes to go with the chicken. This is a fairly easy recipe to do as we are already cooking the chicken in the reflector oven, so the potatoes will cook in the drippings of that chicken. You can cook them at the same time without much fuss. At this point, the chicken has already been cooking for about 20 minutes, and the potatoes have been parboiled to give them a head start. Finally, as a sweet treat, I'll be making my favorite lemonade recipe. This recipe comes from Robert Roberts' cookbook, The House Servants Directory. The reason why I wanted to include this is that in doing some research into black settlers in Ontario, I wasn't able to find many sources relating to culinary history. This represents an area of research that I would like to explore further, and hopefully other culinary historians will do the same. Robert Roberts' cookbook was the first cookbook published by a black author in North America, and for this reason it is historically significant. So in place of including a Canadian source, I wanted to include one that was as close as possible. I added the rind, lemon juice, and 2 cups of sugar. After letting it sit for a few minutes, I strained it off and it's ready to serve.